All right, guys. All right, guys. And guys and Thomas. Okay, if you guys don't know, this is Ian Stone. Ian Stone is a multi-county forestry agent with IFAS. I know you're the exclusive guy in the Panhandle. Are you the exclusive guy in all of Florida?
It depends on how you define a forestry agent.
All right, so he's the exclusive guy in all of Florida. So,
I do know, and I haven't been told by the IFAS administration to stop saying it, I am the only IFAS extension agent that is a fully registered and certified forest.
there you go.
I'm the only person that carries that title. Well, thank y'all. You usually don't get clear.
So, as such, if you don't know a little bit of his history, he was our county forester for a little while. He worked for the Florida Forestry Service. I actually worked for him at the Florida Forestry Service for a little while, and then I wised up and went to extension, and then he followed me.
I think we wised up about the same time, and it took me a little longer.
We don't talk about burning. Like 5 of you got that reference.
You have to have kids.
Deal with your grandkids more.
I taught
Yeah,
you how to
well-
graph.
He's got a graph. You taught me that graphing long way fine is a useless thing.
It's a
But
difficult
I'll
thing.
go ahead and let me take over. The whole purpose of this class is to kind of get you guys to start to understand that your landscapes, your home landscapes came from somewhere, and to understand those environments that they still exist in. It's just because they cut all the trees down doesn't mean that that environment changed. And so I want you guys to be able to recognize those environments so that when you come in, you can go, oh, this used to be wetlands. So we really do need to manage our gardens with these methodologies versus those methodologies. That's kind of the intent of this class today. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Ian, and then I will sit over here and have them.
All right. Well, I'm gonna put my other two agent co-workers on the spot, because this is probably not gonna take the full hour. And one of the things that at the forestry meetings and stuff we figured out is people really love a presentation followed by like a discussion forum with, several shorter presentations with, one or two where it's like, okay, here we go. Everybody can talk, ask questions. We can have a discussion, and we'll kind of probably do that here at the end. This is a presentation I've wound up giving it several different. I just did this same one with a guided little hike out at Biophilia Center over at Nacusi Plantation, because they asked if I'd be a guest speaker for a couple of their open public days this year, which was fun. So, as Josh said with the intro, I'm in other states. Typically, they have an extension forestry unit. We're not quite organized that way with UF. Every state needs to organize their extension how it makes sense for them and their public. My counterparts in Alabama, every single segment of the state is assigned to extension forester. Same in Georgia. Because in those states, to say that I am a forester and that I am an extension forester, I have to be a certified and registered forester. I cannot practice forestry. I can't give you any recommendations. Just like, the guy constructing the bridge can't sign off on the engineer plans. Same way, only a certified forester can sign off on things in Alabama. So I carry that license in Alabama, and if anybody wants to know why, it's because we don't have an equivalent here in Florida. We used to, they got rid of it. So that's a personal beef of mine. If you want to talk about that off the clock, we can do that. On the clock, I have to watch what I say. So, but I always tell people, in Florida, when it comes to forest management, and this is part of my presentation for the class today, if you're hiring an arborist, if you're hiring somebody to do work on your trees, which is basically part of your little slice of urban forest, or you're hiring somebody to do work on your land, some of y'all may own acreage. You may not just own a 1/4 acre lot in town. You may own 20 or 30 acres, or I know the Spencers, Miss Suzanne Spencer's old client of mine for a long time, so I'm glad she's here. You may own acreage. Hire a professional that is properly certified. But in Florida, it's on you to vet the professional. In a lot of other states, there are requirements that the professionals present their credentials to a licensing agency and get a certification and sign off before they advertise as that professional. So for this, in Florida, it's on you as the homeowner or as the landowner to say this is a certified professional, and I'm working on some fact sheets and stuff like that to help people with that decision-making process. You know, anybody can come up to you and tell you they're a forester in Florida, and they're not breaking a law. They do that in Alabama, and they charge them just like an engineer or a doctor says, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer. It's like, do you have a license? No, then guess what? You just committed a felony. Different states, different approaches, don't know necessarily which one is right. Me being a professional forester and very intent on a forester makes a mistake, it's a 30-something year mistake. And if you've ever talked to a landowner that had a bad experience with a forester, a forester or forestry contractor that did something that they had to spend a lot of extra money and time fixing, they'll tell you, you know, really make sure you've got, and one of the things is you almost kind of don't need a license necessarily because people doing bad work don't last very long because word of mouth, every landowner knows every other one. So if you're not doing good work, pretty soon nobody wants to work with you. But it still is on you to, and we can talk a little about that. But today what I'm trying to help y'all learn is, like Josh said, you know, we don't work in a vacuum. Everything that we have, whether you have a house that fronts on the beach or something, almost every ecosystem in the state of Florida is a forest ecosystem of some sort, except for our grasslands, which are typically a wetland of some sort. And there are a series of disturbance and various things. And we actually, there's a class that you can take if you go to school in forestry and other things called ecosystem taxonomy. So we have a way of determining, okay, that is this forest, that is this forest, that is this component. And I'm going to go through a little of that and then talk about our major landform types here in the Panhandle. So somebody name me a forest type here in Santa Rosa County. Okay, I heard pine. So what did you say? Pine forest. All right, good answer. You can get more specific than that.
Upland pine.
Upland pine. Okay, well, what separates an upland pine from just pine forest? Okay, now it has a hillside pitcher plant bog in the middle of the upland forest. What is it now? Is it? It only covers half an acre, and I'm dealing with 500 acres of forest. Is it a wetland forest or not? And that's my little nugget of, you know, you start discussing this. Okay, how do you determine when it becomes a wetland forest? What percentage and all of that? And it's actually a very complicated thing. Foresters, what they do is they break it up into things we call stands. And a stand is basically an area of forest that's uniform enough that I can treat it as one management block. So if I have enough wetlands, I would break that off into another stand and say that stand is wet flatwoods and that stand is upland pine. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So for all of those were valid answers, by the way. None of those were wrong. A pine forest is a pine forest. But at what point does it stop being a pine forest and being a mixed pine hardwood forest? And there's a series of very interesting things that you have to do. The number one thing is foresters go out and inventory the heck out of it. And we have this cool thing in the United States called the Forest Inventory and Analysis section with the U.S. Forest Service. And that's a weird program that's a combo of state, local, and federal stuff. Some states say, we don't want to deal with it. Y'all fund it. Y'all hire the people. States like Florida, there is a FIA forester hired by Florida Forest Service that does all of that. And they have permanent plots established all across the United States that have been measured on a regular returning interval since 1910. And so if somebody goes and turns it into a parking lot with a Walmart, they come back and they go, hey, it's non-forested now. And that's how they track all of that changes. We probably have one of the best data sets for that of almost any country out there. Really cool. So when people go, what does the U.S. Forest Service actually do? That's another one. So if there's a major fire that goes through there and that completely changes the forest type, they have the hard data to show that. And that is funded and required in perpetuity, basically. They're going to keep doing that until somebody tells them that they can't no more. And that's how a lot of this, when they say there's X number of longleaf pine forest and X number of bottomland hardwood forest acres in the United States. They are not just pulling that number out. They know. So, yes, okay, good. So forest communities and types, how do we determine that? And typically, as you said, pine forest. That means the dominant tree species is pine. And getting a little more specific, if it's longleaf pine, then it is a longleaf pine forest. And if it's 50% longleaf and 50% slash, it's a mixed pine forest, specifically longleaf slash. So we drill down and we go by the dominant tree species. And the dominant tree species are the biggest, tallest trees that take up the biggest area of crown spread. So that's the trees that capture the site the best. It's also defined by understory and midstory plants. So if I have an open longleaf pine savanna, that means that there's pretty much no brush out there and it's all grass and forbs and that sort of stuff. We'll see a picture of that in a minute. Versus a shrubby flatwoods means that it's a wet flatwood site, probably slash pine with tie and gallberry and all kinds of other fun things. And most things in there have thorns and want to hurt you. It's kind of like forests in Texas. When I used to draw those on the cruising block, if I was a senior enough forester, it was like, well, that goes to the intern crew. Because I've hacked my way through that one before and I'm going to let them have fun. They'll either decide they want to be a forester or not. So, and then also it's not just that. Then we go to, well, how do I determine a drier site versus a wetland site? Well, we go with location, hydrology, and other factors. So if you go down to Santa Rosa Island, you go out to Fort Pickens. Anybody goes to Fort Pickens? Y'all want to know the really drill down what that is? Anybody want to know how the U.S. Forest Service? That is a xeric maritime slash forest. I think that's xeric maritime. Because the soil type is beach sand. It holds almost no moisture. It's very dry, yet it occurs on an island. So maritime is defined as within as touching a coastal feature, a bay, the intercoastal waterway, a sound, touching a coastal feature, or on an island. More specifically, usually a maritime forest is on an island. So all forests in Cuba are a maritime forest. Specifically a Pinus cubensis, Cuban pine. That's why, anybody ever heard of the Isle of Pines in Cuba? How do you think you got its name? So that's a specific subtype of Caribbean pine forest.
So even when you go up in elevation, say to the mountain or an island, it's still considered that?
It may.
Or does it change? Doesn't Cuba have mountains?
It does. And those are montane forests.
Okay.
But technically, if we wanted to, we could define them as maritime montane forests, which would be Caribbean maritime montane forests are different than, but they will have a lot of the same species as mainland montane tropical forests in the same latitude. That's the kind of stuff y'all don't need to worry about. If you're thinking, if you want to get that down into it, I suggest you go back to school and become a forest ecologist. But that's how specific people that study that and go, wait a minute, this is a critically endangered forest ecosystem internationally. That's how they determine that. Because if Cuba's montane forests are unique compared to other places, and there's only 2% of them left on Cuba, now we got a bit of a problem. Because those forests can only occur in a certain belt, in a certain rain type, with certain species, with a certain composition, and then there's what was called endemic species that only live. And so that's the story of longleaf pine in North America. It used to be one of our biggest forest types. Now we got less than about 2%. But it's also one of the best forestry stories because it's growing. We're restoring longleaf like we never have before, and the Longleaf Alliance is a big part of that. But soil types, location, hydrology, is it on a mountain? Is it on elevation? What slope is it on? Does it have sandy soils? Is it silt sand complex? Is it clay? Hydrology is how water moves through it. Is it wet and soggy? Do I go squish, squish, squish when I walk? Is there a salt component to the water in the soil or not? That's a big one here. That's a big one. Slash pine is the most salt tolerant species we've got. When you go down, people go down to the coast and say, oh, the coast has such beautiful longleaf. And I always shake my head and go, no, it doesn't. Those are slash pines because longleaf won't tolerate salt too much. It'll tolerate a little bit. Longleaf probably got the biggest range of adaptability of any of them. But type of ecosystems based on larger trees that form the canopy. So what makes up the canopy? If it's oak and there's a grassy understory, it's an oak savanna. So that occurs in Tennessee. That's an endangered forest type in the United States. You will notice if you do enough of this that seems like there's a correlation between fire-driven forests, lack of fire, and endangered ecosystems. We'll talk about that in a little more detail. So tree identification is an important first step. If I need to know what the dominant tree species are to define the forest, I have to be able to identify them. And that's a class called dendrology, which I used to teach. And I'll probably be working with Josh and other agents around the Panhandle to get that information out there. Because I get so many calls of what tree is this? It's like, that's great. I'm glad you're interested. And here's what tree it is. But if I can teach somebody to identify trees, then they're great master gardeners because you're going to go out and teach other people how to identify trees. And that increases their appreciation of their ecosystems and surroundings. You also want to learn to notice soil conditions and that sort of stuff. All right, am I on a hill? Am I in a bottom? Am I by a river? Am I by the coast? Stream sides versus ridges. Am I up on the top of the ridge? Yes, we have topography in Florida. No, it's not that impressive. Yes, our highest point is in Walton County, where my main office is, and it's the lowest high point in all of the states. It's the lowest high point. It's the lowest. It's the highest point in the state, but the lowest elevation that qualifies as the highest point. Does that track? Okay. I actually have a client that has land right next to there, and his dad has like a whole history of Lakewood, Florida, and the highest point and all kinds of stuff. It's pretty cool. Is it coastal or lakeshore? That sort of stuff. So for y'all, your home, where is your home? Is your home in Jay up on a ridge? Is it clay? Or do I live down on the coast fronting the bay? Or do I live out on the island in a condo? Think about that. For y'all applying this to your home landscape, think about that. Where do I live? Where is it? What are the conditions? And more than likely, all of the original forests there have been obliterated at some point. So that could be, well, maybe I want to make my yard more like the forest that was there. And we'll talk about how you can apply that knowledge too. So you also want to learn to observe the understory and midstory. Grass, open grassy versus open and shrubby, dense canopy. Is it open below and dense under the canopy with a dense canopy, or is it a bunch of shrubs and small trees? You get into weird stuff too. Anybody heard of the pygmy cypress forest in Tatesville before? Oh, if you want to go see a cool place, please take a trip. Y'all like get together as master gardeners, go take a trip out there. I'll get you the info where it's at. But that's what we call an edaphic condition. So a local geologic driven soil condition that creates a forest type. What happens is because of the water and soil and nutrient conditions in the soil, then basically it turns them into little bonsai trees. And it's the coolest little thing you've ever seen. Like these trees are like 300 years old and they're like this tall. And it's all because of the local conditions. And there's only like 5 places in the United States where those pygmy forests occur. Most of them are on serpentine soils in California and Oregon. And serpentine soils, serpentine is a type of rock form that when it degrades, it turns into a soil type that has all kinds of heavy metals and weird stuff. It's cool. It's cool stuff. But all of that kind of stuff plays into ecology. So you can have very tiny little variances that cause huge effects. And that's water typically is that in Florida. You go up 2 feet in elevation and it changes the forest type because that's the difference between permanent wet feet and semi-wet feet. You're gonna need to learn other vegetation and small trees, shrubs, ground cover. You put it all together and you notice subtle changes. I walk out of a brushy, wet forest into a nice, big, pretty open, grassy forest. So, plant identification is what a lot of what ecology is built on around here, because plants are the basis of the food web and everything else. So if you want to get a skill that really helps you appreciate landforms and landscapes and stuff, plant ID is probably one of your best ones. Oh, I haven't seen you in a minute. I remember working. Yeah, I didn't know. So an area where conditions begin to change and the forest type shifts to another is what we call a transition zone or ecotone. If we're day-to-day lay people, we call that a transition zone. If we're scientists, we call it an ecotone. So, I try to give people, and most people appreciate it, the sciencey side of stuff, because you go and read a publication, they start talking about ecotones and you're like, what's that? But if I give you the day-to-day, you can go, oh, transition zone makes sense. That's just a different word for it that academic folks use, because for some reason we like to invent our own languages. I don't know. But technically an ecotone is a transition between two different ecosystems. An edge is a transition between two different types or ages of vegetation. If I have a block that's regularly burned every 2 to 3 years, and this block only gets burned every 10, where that fire line is a nice hard change point, and that becomes an edge. And a whole lot of animals love edges. You talk to wildlife people and they're like, edge, more edge, I want more edge. And foresters are like, there is a limit to this. Foresters tend to be kind of like engineers, You tell me what you want, I'll go out and build it. You say, oh, I want to take my unmanaged pine forest and turn it into a nice, big, pretty open and grassy forest, and I'll make that happen. You tell me I want to maximize my timber per acre per yield, and I'll go out there and do that. But so that communication is really important in management. But edge, certain species love edge. Some species love the spotted owl, the infamous spotted owl. The red cockaded woodpecker needs a longleaf pine forest that's open and well burned, with at least 20 to 30% of the trees 80 years plus, preferably infected with red heart fungus. That could be why they're that unique and specific. So if we don't know to manage for that, and the foresters are like we used to be, running around, nobody telling us, they're like, oh, well, all these red heart infected pines, that's not good. That's a disease. We need to get them out of here. Oops. Yeah. So it's what you don't know that usually always gets you. But the big clue is the transition. When you see vegetation types changing, you're probably going from one forest type to another, or one type, maybe it's the same forest type, but this one's managed a little different than this one over here. So you notice you're hiking and you notice the soil's all of a sudden I'm not walking on sand anymore. There's slick clay under my feet and I'm getting stuff stuck to my boots. You notice slope on the ground changes. This happens, you go hiking in the Appalachians, you'll notice this a lot. You'll see a big change in elevation, and then you'll see a big change in the forest. You see an abrupt change in the vegetation type, of course, or you see wet or drier. Your feet are nice and dry, and now they're squishy. Now you go, I wish I had not worn sandals. That kind of stuff is what you need to, and observation is the most powerful tool you've got with that. So pine forests, and why did y'all pick pine forests as the first thing that popped in your head? Why not hardwood? Or do what? You want to guess what the dominant forest type in Florida is? Pine forests. Here's a cool thing about pine forests. They are fire dependent. Take fire away, and we're going to get what we call Laurentian hardwood forest, which means everything has a laurel-shaped leaf. If you ever look at all of our hardwoods around here, they're evergreen, semi-evergreen, and they have a very nondescript hard, like laurel shaped leaf. If you think of like the laurel leaf, laurel wreaths and crowns that they use at the Olympics and stuff, a laurel was very common. And one of the places where Laurentian forests or laurel leaf hardwood forests are extremely common, and probably the first place people like Linnaeus and other taxonomist type people encountered them, Greece and southern Italy. Those are shrubby Laurentian forests. So if you took fire away, we'd have something that looked kind of like that. Sort of like dry, semi-tropical Costa Rican forests is what we would have. Now, you've got upland versus flatwoods. Upland forests are obviously in the uplands where there's hills and things. Flatwoods are very, very flat. So if you go to Blackwater, you're dealing with upland pine forests. If you go to Garthon Point, hey, welcome to the flatwoods. Then we have xeric, which is a technical term for very excessively dry. They're almost like a desert, and we have lots of those. Xeric sandhills are a common forest type. Take fire away from them, they turn to xeric sandhill scrubs. And then hydric. Hydric means they have lots of water, they're excessively wet. So Garthon Point is a hydric / pine flatwoods. Those are hydric forests. If you go up into Blackwater, up off of, if you take Munson Highway and go all the way to the Alabama line, you'll notice all of a sudden you see this area with very sandy stuff, kind of looks like beach sand. Those are xeric upland sandhills. You go across a little ways over into other drainage basin from Sweetwater Creek over to Coldwater Creek, and those are clay hills. Not even 10 miles apart. So the dominant pine species in Florida are longleaf, slash, sand, and loblolly. Yes. Shortleaf pine occurs, pond pine occurs, but they are in nowhere a dominant, they nowhere are they common. We don't have shortleaf forests here. You go up into Georgia, yeah, there's shortleaf forests. There's Virginia pine forests. We don't have any Virginia pine in Florida. So those are our 4 major trees. They're also our 4 major timber species. They're also considered some of the 4 best hard pine lumber in the world. The European governments wanted this because of those species. That was one of the biggest driving factors, because he who had pine forests had big navy. If you had a big navy, you were a world power. If you didn't have big navy, you didn't have world power. So we can talk about that too. But now, how many, by a show of hands, who wants to spend time out there? Yeah. How many of y'all consider that like if you wanted a pine forest, that was what it's supposed to look like? Naturally, if you read Bartram's Travels, that's what they look like. But you notice it looks real lush, and it has all kinds of grass and everything. That's because this is a clay hill. Clay holds more nutrients, it keeps more water, and so you wind up with a lot more lush. If you ever wonder why your dogwoods don't do well, it's because that's where they grow. So when you go in your nice sandy front yard and plant a dogwood in the full blazing sun and it doesn't do well, look at that. Do you see full sun anywhere in there? No, you see dappled shade. Because dogwoods, that's what they like. It's what they like. So sometimes knowing what ecosystem used to be around you can help you make decisions about what might grow there. But very productive. Some of the most diverse ecosystems in the entire United States, in all of North America, are longleaf clay hills. Also longleaf flatwoods. Because slash pine has a really restricted range. When you get up into flatwoods in North Carolina and South Carolina, it's longleaf then, it's not slash anymore. Anybody recognize this? That's a longleaf xeric sandhill. Probably recently planted, because all of the trees are rather short and the same age and in rows. But that's probably a restoration of sandhills. A lot of the sandhills were converted to poor pasture. They were used as pasture, or before we walled off things and put fences and stuff, they turned the cattle loose and they ran around in there and whatever they could get a hold of to eat, that's what they ate. They've actually done some cool studies, and for interest of time, we can talk about that afterwards. But there was a reason that the Piney Woods cattle, which is a subset of Old Spanish breed, they are different than cracker cattle. You know, I've got some friends in Louisiana that are like, I get so mad at all those Florida folks. There's like anything with long horns is cracker cattle. Those are from the peninsula. They ain't from up on the coast. and that's actually a distinction, you know, and the Piney Woods cattle are actually an endangered breed. So, but that's what did well here in those type of conditions, because they will actually have done some studies on them and they use them in restoration now, because they will hook trees with their horns, push them down and browse almost like a goat. They have really hard mouths and stuff compared to other cattle. And they had centuries of living in these woodlands to guide they let nature breed them, not us. That is a flatwoods longleaf / mixed species. So you can clearly see, if you look at the photo, there is slash pine and longleaf. Looks like more slash. Now, notice what we picked up that we didn't see in the other photographs. What's that stuff? Good. What kind of palmetto? Because there's like 4 of them. Saw palmetto. Saw palmetto is very common in flatwoods. Also can be interesting when fires get started. So, similar, doesn't it kind of look similar to the upland clay hill? Real similar. Take fire out of that, it turns into a tie thicket in about 6 years. You can't even walk through it. Totally different. Foresters call that a degraded ecosystem, a degraded forest, because of it having a critical function removed, something has occurred and it's not what it should be. So don't get mad at people burning the woods. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. That's anybody that's heard me talk you've heard that drum beat. I won't beat it too loud. Now, isn't that pretty too? This is a longleaf pine mixed upland pine hardwoods forest. As you get to the Alabama line, you pick this up. As you go to Evergreen, you pick this up. Because of the ecosystem and the soil conditions and how wet and clayey these soils are, fire does not behave the same way. And fire does not get intense enough typically to kill the hardwoods. So any hardwoods that are big enough, i.e. red oak, white oak, they get up into the crowns with the loblollies. Ones that aren't, persimmon, chinkapin, that sort of stuff, they stay down here. So there's a very well-defined mid-story shrub belt in these forests. You know? And this is really important. When I go to a brand new landowner that's never done forest management before, the first thing I want to do is cruise all the timber and figure out what they've got. And if I can, try to figure out what was done before. Inventory. I like to say I'm a tree accountant. You know, if I don't know what's there, I don't know what. You say, what's my timber worth? I don't know what you got. I got to go out and figure what it's got. And by the way, if you're a landowner and you don't know what your timber's worth, it's very easy to have bad results.
Mostly, is there a market for hardwood around here? Is it all pine?
No. The only people that take hardwood around here are pellet mills, and I know Miss Spencer will tell you that is like, if you get money for your hardwoods here, be happy. If they'll put it on the truck and haul it to the pulp mill or the pellet mill at $2 or $3 a ton, and you had more hardwoods than you wanted in your forest, you got management done. You did good forest management and you got paid a little for it. If they give you nothing for it to haul it off the site, that's better than you having to deal with piles of it on your site. So the reason we don't have hardwood markets here is we don't have the only hardwood market in the northern panhandle is in Apalachicola, because they have a huge belt of bottomland hardwood forests, and we'll talk about that. I took some hardwood silviculture. Managing hardwood forest is really hard. Pine's pretty simple. I've even got chemicals that'll kill most everything in a pine tree. The loblolly will be like, okay. So if that's a problem because somebody didn't manage for a long time, I can take care of that problem with a chemical control. Do I have to? No. I could take care of it with a mechanical control. Do you want to pay $700 or $350 an acre to do it? If you're a little cap strapped, I'm going to tell you, you can do the same thing with some chemical. I know chemical's a dirty word, but the question is, what keeps our forest healthy and meets the landowner's objective? That's upland hardwood. That is pretty much restricted to blufflands. If you go up the Escambia River, you get into these big bluffland areas, and you'll see forests that kind of look like this. This is an upland. This is not particularly common in Florida, and it's quite. And the areas that we have, a lot of times, unfortunately, they get developed, and this forest type is one I watch out for, because any forest type that is exceedingly rare on the landscape, my little conservation antennas go up and go, maybe we ought to look at that before we lose too much of it. So this is, and this is what you see as you get up in, when you go into Alabama, you see a lot more of this. But notice there is no pine. So the difference between the upland mixed pine hardwood forest or the upland pine forest, the only real difference, they all grow on a lot of the same soils and stuff. This one, for whatever reason, fire doesn't go through. And the hardwoods grow in. And here, shade tends to be the thing like that determines the species composition. You know, so if you don't manage it, you tend to get a big thicket. And it's like, yep, too many trees is a bad thing. Fun fact, most forests in the United States now are 50% more dense than they were at colony or higher. Lack of forest management. If nothing else, the Native Americans burned and did things. They did forest management too. We just didn't have written records and scientists and FIA data. And if you sit down and talk to any Native Americans, they'll tell you that. You know, but it's not, they hadn't always had the best relationship with people that came by and said, I'm a scientist from the government and I'm here to help. You know, they're like, what exactly are you doing and why? And that's indigenous knowledge. That's their knowledge. That's their cultural stuff. If I'm willing to go and listen, I can pick it up. But if I'm willing to go and listen, and then if my approach is I'm going and listen to tell you how you're doing it wrong, they're usually a little less receptive, and I don't blame them. So this is bottomland hardwoods. What separates this hardwood ecosystem from upland hardwoods is one, their location, two, their slope, and primarily, you'll see a lot of the same species, but primarily it's water. These occur in floodplains of major rivers. And I came from the poster child of this called the Lower Mississippi, which is a tweet bit of a river. You know, I think it's 1.5 miles wide at the widest point, Algiers Bend in New Orleans. So there was a lot of this in Louisiana, and then I moved to Pine World, I call it. But if you go up into Mobile, Tensas, this is a major forest type. If you go into Apalachicola, this is a major forest type. If you go into the Choctawhatchee Basin, it's just in this part of the coast, our basins are very narrow. Because of the soil types and changes as you go west, you tend to wind up with much broader, more clay component. And you wind up with what we call, what did we settle on, Thomas? With White River? What did we call alluvial rivers?
Yeah, White Rivers.
White River, whitewater rivers. No, I call them alluvial rivers because they have a lot of sediment. And it makes more sense to average people. You say whitewater, they go, rafts, you know? So that's the big thing. And then how that flood dynamic changes. We had a graduate student that was here at UF Milton campus, nice guy, and I can't remember his name now to save my life, but he was studying regeneration dynamics in the Apalachicola. He had worked under Dr. Sharma when we had him here. He was a great silviculture professor, and Auburn grabbed him, and I don't blame him for going, not one bit. If I could take over that job, I'd have gone. But I love spending time in these forests. This is my heart. That's my duck hunting world right there. Do not take that up as a hobby. That's worse than many drugs. Not really. I mean, but seriously, you can spend a large amount of time and money on duck hunting and most other recreational pursuits. This is a cypress dome. Now, cypress domes are different than cypress strands. Cypress strands are usually technically a bottomland style of forest, but they're not a hardwood forest because these are conifers. I don't make up the rules of how it all works.
Is this what they used to call a wet weather pond?
Yeah. Yeah. But if it's a wet weather pond with no cypress trees, it's a Tupelo forest.
Oh, okay.
So we'll talk about that in a minute. Remember, dominant tree type. The dome is a bit of a misnomer because people say cypress dome and they think that there's some kind of landform that's a dome. No, it's a bowl.
Mhm.
But the cypress on the edge don't get as much water conditions, so they tend to be shorter. And then in the center, they grow the tallest. So from a distance, it looks like a dome. The trees make the dome, but they're inhabiting a bowl. Does that make sense? This is wood duck world. You know, wood duck, reason that and what's really great about here in the Panhandle, and I saw it firsthand in the Central Valley of California, and we can talk about that here in a minute. We kind of open it up for discussions. We farm around stuff. We don't farm through it. We don't go get the filter, get the heavy equipment, bulldoze it to the ground. We go, the crops ain't gonna grow that good in there anyway. Let's put a buffer around it and farm around it. We do a real good job here of farming ecologically minded around things, and always have. And all of those little edge effects that the farm fields create are good for wildlife. That's why when you go out on a farm here and you get close to this thing, all of a sudden wood ducks are zipping across. And they're happy because they're like, hey man, somebody installed this great food source next to me called corn. And when the combine comes through, you'll watch them. They'll get on along the edge and they'll sit there and eat the corn. People have a lot of misnomers about conservation and renewable resource stuff. And that's one of my program areas I'm really passionate about. Farming's not bad for the environment. There's a wrong way to do it where it becomes bad for the environment. Same with timber. Same with anything. Big one that's a personal pet peeve of mine is there's a bad way to develop stuff for housing that's bad for the environment. You know, that in Florida is where this typically gets bulldozed and turned to something else. It's like, can't we develop around it? And I actually have a really good picture where they did that at a major golf course, and we can talk about that. They left a rookery, and it was that forest type. And we were out, me and my wife were out there, and I was like, it was the coolest thing on the whole golf course. Because, you know, had this huge rookery. And I know why they did it, because they were going to fine them $1 million or something. What they were going to have to pay to obliterate that. But that's smart. That's a smart way to do that, you know. If you make it painful enough, money-wise, they'll figure something out. This is cypress Tupelo. So every now and then you can see some cypress in there. Or if it just was Tupelo, cypress and Tupelo like the same conditions. The question is what percentage? So wet weather pond with all Tupelo, Tupelo forest. Mixed, cypress Tupelo. Same wet weather pond, same conditions. Only thing that separates them is the tree component. Sand pine. Sand pine is a unique, if you want to talk more taxonomy, grab me, we'll do that. But sand pine is related to several other pine trees that are scattered, isolated little populations. Virginia pine, jack pine, lodgepole pine, and sand pine are all very, very closely related. And you can find lodgepole pine all the way in British Columbia. So the theory goes that at one point they were all one species, and then when the ice age receded, they got kind of broke up. And Florida has two populations of sand pine. Choctawhatchee strain, named for Choctawhatchee Bay, goes into Alabama just a tiny bit, and then here in the Panhandle. Those have different cone conditions and all kinds of different stuff, and they turned out they were actually pretty good for dry land forest. Xeric sandhills. I could plant pines in lines. You know, we're going to talk about pines and lines in a minute, but they were good for that. The problem is when those used to be longleaf forest, sand pine put out a lot of seed. Then you got a little bit of a restoration hurdle to get over. But so you had sand pine forests. Those are typically along the coast. You can see elements of sand pine forest down at Naval Live Oaks, which is another fun bonus fact. First forest preserve in all of the United States. Why? National defense. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then you have this in the mountains where wind blows and causes certain species to grow like this, which is typically where you see pictures of trees that look like this. We call that Krumholtz form. It looks like a bonsai tree because basically the salt and the wind force it to grow like a bonsai tree. So that's where you get that. And here we call it coastal form. Here we call it dune form or coastal form. That tells me that there's salt spray right off the bat. You've got salt in the soil and you got salt spray. So if you see your trees growing like this around your property, you need to pay attention to salt tolerance. But this is coastal scrubland, coastal mixed scrub with a major sand pine component. So if there's enough sand pine versus live oaks or evergreen oaks, there's myrtle oaks and others, I could define it as a sand pine scrub versus an oak scrub. Just depends. And there's our oak scrub and or coastal scrub. Why is it oak scrub? Now, I got a question for you. Those oak trees will get 80 feet tall. Why aren't they? Hurricanes is one. Bingo. That's the major one. Lack of nutrients and salt in the soil. It's the soil conditions. Remember I talked about the pygmy forest? Welcome to live oak pygmy forest. That's still a forest. There's a canopy, is there not? Yeah, it's a canopy most of us can't walk in, but the beach mouse is happy. But it's still a canopy. It's still a canopy. There is a distinct vegetation layer that forms a canopy. The fact that it goes all the way to the ground is only 3 feet tall is irrelevant. It's a 3 foot tall canopy layer. And if you ever manage to find one that's big enough that you can walk in there on a hot day, that is the coolest place you'll ever be because there is no sun, period. The Spanish that first landed on Santa Rosa Island was probably like, okay, somewhere to get out of the blazing sun. I have to crawl on my knee, but it's okay. Because if you've ever stood in the full blazing sun out there with nowhere to escape, you would be hunting it too.
60 years ago, there was a beautiful one on Santa Rosa Island, big enough to walk under. I have a picture of it.
And Ivan took care of it, didn't it?
No,
Oh.
it didn't last that long.
Development?
Yep.
Yeah. And so that's a concern, right? Because where's our big development pressure? It's on the coast. So that's a conversation that I could help with as an extension service, but that's a conversation for you and every other citizen in Santa Rosa County to have with your county commissions. Is do we need to define at what point have we lost enough of this that anything that falls in this category goes into the preserve it first block? We don't do land management very good in the, well, like you go to Germany, if it's prime ag land, you ain't putting a house on. Because Germany has a very, very finite amount of prime ag land and they recognize it. Problem in the United States is we have what looks like to us an infinitely exhaustible amount of land. And that has informed us as a society. And we can talk about that a little more too. Other minor and cultivated forest types. Some people say, oh, well, pine plantation doesn't count as a forest. No. Sorry, it's still a forest. It just resembles more like an agricultural field. An agricultural field is still an ecosystem. It has all of the components to qualify as an ecosystem. It is just a very human kind of engineered ecosystem because we define that land as needed for us to have food. I don't know about y'all, but I kind of like having food. So we manage things partly because of what we need too. We'll talk about pine plantations in more detail in a minute, but you have baygall and bayhead and tie swamps. Those are a shrubland swamp. They're a different set of species, but the same landform as pocusons in the Carolinas. You ever read about or hear about pocuson swamps? They're a shrub form swamp. So they have all shrub and small trees. Baygalls, bayhead or baygalls, they typically have what we call bay trees. Swamp bay or sweet bay, which is a magnolia. I know that's confusing, but that's what it is. Red bay, swamp bay, silk bay. And then tie, we have black tie and white tie. We probably have a lot more tie swamp than we used to, and the answer is fire exclusion. So tie swamps are expanding, well-managed pine flatwoods are shrinking because they're getting taken over by tie swamp. You take fire out of a out of a flatwoods area, and eventually it turns into a tie swamp. If the pine trees are surviving, then it's tie swamp with pine overstory. Successional hardwoods are developed from sandhills or other pine types with lack of fire, or abandoned fields left to regrow where no pine can regenerate because there's too much shade. Pines hate shade. The thing that creates the conditions where pines are happy is fire, because the hardwoods that create all the shade burn. And that was coming to that revelation was a major revelation in forest management, especially was driven by Tall Timbers Research Station. They're like, oh, fire. That's what kept longleaf pine forests in. And once that little light bulb went off, you know, all the foresters like me went out and goes, yes, fire. Because that's fun. That's a fun day. Except in the summer. It's not fun in the summer. Now, plantation forests, and a small word about them. How many of y'all use forest products on a daily basis? Okay. If we have a need for X amount of forest products, and I have to fill X amount of forest products with all natural grown pine trees or other trees, how much land do you think I need for that? Versus if I drill down and say, okay, if I do some very intensive forest management, what we call intensive industrial style silviculture, how many acres do you think? So there's this weird thing, and they've studied about it, and actually the more efficient you get at pine plantation forestry, the bigger amount of land you can release from timber demand, because I'm growing 80% more on this acre than this acre over here. So in a weird turnabout, what a lot of people call industrial forestry, and what really gets me is when people go, that's an ecological desert. No, it's not. I can take you out there and show you turkeys. I can show you quail. I can show you all of the species that inhabit a pine forest. It's a question about how I manage it. Now, this is a view out of about an 80-something foot lift. Were you I don't think you were in the lift with me. You might have been. But you know the view I'm talking about when you go up the seed orchard and you're looking at the longleaf forest across the road. This is what a pine plantation, a longleaf pine plantation about 18 years old looks like from an 85-foot lift truck. That's what the canopy looks like. I like that. That was a pretty day. So I've used that picture. But they're still forests, and they provide all the natural benefits forests do. I just manage them different. Yes, it's pines in lines. But 60 years from now, if I want to manage it in an uneven age management, I can. Or 60 years from now, when it's at optimal productivity per acre per year, I can whack it all and clear cut it and plant it again. So they're managed in a way to improve and optimize timber output to meet, and I want to emphasize this, ever increasing wood demand. Our wood demand is not going down. If you think it is, I want you to start counting the amount of Amazon boxes you get. It's not going down. It's changing, but it ain't going away. We're building more houses. Our population is growing worldwide all the time. Wood demand worldwide is increasing every day. And if I'm good at managing 5 acres really intensely, I might be able to save 25 acres for more pure conservation. That's a land management philosophy question, not so much of a technical ecosystem question. Without them, we would increasingly lose natural forests because we would have to go and harvest in natural old growth forests more. So in a weird way, this type of management, which to a lot of people looks not very ecologically friendly, actually is. You probably don't know this, but you live in the most productive wood basket in the entire world. Southeastern United States produces more tonnage of wood per acre per year than anywhere else on this planet. There is a reason that, and you know what's weird? If you work in the industry long enough, you'll figure out all the best stuff goes on a boat. The best quality timber we've got goes to export market. We call it grade pine. Because in this country, typically, I mean, watch people build houses. They do not care about the quality of the 2x4. Stud grade. We respond to how the market is. Here, mostly we get paid on a pure fiber basis. Fiber is fiber is fiber. It's a question of whether I'm putting through the pulp plant or the chip and saw plant or the oriented strand board plant or the saw timber plant. Now, what we pay big money for is power poles. So if I over time, but it takes a long time to grow a power pole. It takes some serious management, because if you don't manage right, you're going to have all kinds of knots and stuff, and then it's not a power pole anymore. Power poles are also the most difficult, limited resource. The wood power poles are a big market. But in this system, I can manipulate it to where I can increase my percentage of poles to the max, because it's very regimented. It's more like agriculture. So when you see that, don't say ecological desert, don't say bad for the environment. It's just very good, more agriculture forestry. You know, if you're a landowner and you own 7,000 acres and you've got the money in your pocket to manage it however you want, and you want to say, I want to manage it to maximal, optimal, ecological minded, I'll tell you two things. One, that's great. Two, just remember, nobody pays you for wildlife or ground cover. The only way you get paid as a forest landowner, typically. Now that's changing a little bit. We've got differences in you know, there's organizations and stuff coming out paying for carbon credits and watershed conservation credits and stuff like that to pay landowners to do what they're already doing because they're ecologically minded. But typically you only get paid in the forest industry when that tree goes on a truck and goes through a mill gate. And at the end of the day, if you can't make stuff make economic sense, then it doesn't matter how ecologically you want something. We live in a capitalist country and we work off of money, you know, and you can own all the land you want, but if you can't pay the taxes on it, you ain't going to own it very long. So that's something for those of y'all that don't own forest land and wonder why forest landowners and foresters sometimes make the decisions we make. Typically, that's why. Now, here's some of my references and such, and I believe that I didn't know if that'd take a full hour, but I strung it out. Yep. But anybody that knows the forest natural area inventory, that's great. You know, that's a lot of what I use to break it up into those things and how we define them in Florida. Silvics Manual of North America. Silvics is how a tree grows, basically. Silviculture is defined as the art and science of growing, basically managing and growing forests. It's a nice short definition, but Silvics in North America, it's free. U.S. Forest Service produces it. You type that in, and you click longleaf pine, you will learn more about longleaf pine than you probably ever wanted to know. And it's managed. If you're interested in how do we manage southern red oak, they got a publication on it. And then my pictures, for the most part, except the ones credited to me, are from this cool website called bugwoods.org. You can find all kinds of cool public domain pictures there that UGA manages.
All of you that need to give me presentations, still take note of that.
Yeah, you can, as long as you cite it properly, you can use it. What you got?
Can you introduce that red thing that helps the owl into longleaf pine that's healthy? Because say I wanted to bring in the house, can I put that on the longleaf?
Okay, so you're mixing two different things. Spotted owls are in the Northwest, and there's a lot of scientific debate about this, but so anybody remember the spotted owl controversy of the 1970s and 80s? That caused a tweet of political and in industry and forest management heartburn, I'm going to call it. And it really created, you know, some issues. When you go up to the Pacific Northwest, you will go to ghost towns, effectively. They used to be forest mill towns. And when all of the stuff went down with the spotted owl and the Endangered Species Act and its listing, somebody turned off the timber tap. basically. And if you have a timber mill and you have no timber, because the federal government owns all the land around said mill, and the federal government has said thou shalt not cut any more trees, you got a bit of economic problem. And so a lot of people got pink slips and no job. And if you go to those towns, I got a young man that's a friend of mine and also a forest, I'm his forester mentor, professional mentor. He now works up there in the Pacific Northwest studying spotted owl. And he says, I can tell you from taking plots that where active forest management is going on, typically we hadn't picked up spotted owl. So we take that for what it's worth. But he was from a point blank, when you go out off of work and you go to the local bar or the restaurant and stuff, be very careful about what you tell people what you do, because it is still very controversial. And if you say, oh, I'm a spotted owl biologist, he said, you may need to start running. They still tell people, not so much Forest Service, but U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they say, do not wear your uniform off the clock. Because people are, you want to go up there and say spotted owl, see how that conversation goes. Because I mean, you know, but the flip side of that is that whole way that was handled, and they need them and Marble Murrelet need old growth forests. But I can manage old growth forests. You just got to tell me, hey, don't mess up the forest structure. Don't harvest any tree over this age. That's fine. I can do that. You know? Yeah. You can't introduce it. It's naturally occurring. Red cockaded woodpecker, red heart fungus. So one of the only longleaf I've ever encountered in my career that had red heart fungus was about a 220-year-old tree that we had to take down in a public park in Defuniak Springs. And they called me out because they said, hey, it's not looking too good. And guess what? It had it. This is one of the pine bark beetles, which is a whole different discussion. We'll probably have a presentation on what. Because pine bark beetles are a big deal if you've got pine trees in your landscape. But, you know, they said, well, there's, you know, you got bark beetles, there's no way to get rid of them, you got to cut it down. Well, when they cut it down, the center had red heart. And usually about 100 years old, longleaf becomes susceptible. Well, how many 100-year-old longleaf do you think we got out in the landscape? A lot more than you would guess. But, so it's a question of tree age and whether the fungus is present. But again, that's a management question. If we do what? Yeah, I imagine you could inoculate the soil with what have you. And I imagine you could probably inject it into the right tree. But if the tree under about 100 years, its natural defenses are very good at defeating. So basically the pine tree gets old, it gets old enough, like all organisms, as it gets old enough, it gets a little, its immune system isn't quite as good and that sort of stuff. And the red heart will colonize. And it's a very, very slow acting fungus, and it only affects the heart of the tree.
So forestry, I live in the middle of the forest, forestry's not gonna get this bring in this fungus, like 150 years.
Wait a minute. You're talking about going and introducing red heart fungus onto Blackwater State Forest?
No, private land in the.
Private land? You can do whatever you want up to your boundary line.
Right. And
But
then,
if you go off your boundary line, public or private, I could sue the pants off of you. And if I was the next door landowner, I would. Because you're introducing stuff that is gonna kill my tree. How would you do it?
would they burn it?
No. You know.
What's the woodpeckers? Yeah.
That's fine. You can join the Safe Harbor program and manage your pine forest for woodpeckers, and they will give you woodpeckers to introduce into your tree. That's cool. But the answer to the question is, well, I can't really create those conditions. I have to let nature do that. So what they did to address the issue was, okay, well, we've managed a certain way, and so now we don't have the trees and the red heart fungus as much, because foresters are like, oh, well, you know, back when we were getting told, you know, hey, don't leave defect trees in the woods. Tree with a red heart fungus is a defect tree. Whack. You know, that's just, you know, foresters are kind of like engineers. You tell me to build a culvert past X amount of, I build it, you know, if you say, well, but, you know, so-and-so built a pond, now there's more water in there and the culvert's not passing enough water. It's like, you didn't tell me that. I engineered it for this. You know, so that's the kind of, so the solution to that is, you ever wonder why they climb up the trees and could take a chainsaw and cut a little block in there and stick a nest cavity in it? Because you can't solve 100-year management problem right this minute. So we got around it by introducing nest boxes, and that's been key. But the big story is, in the southeast, we figured out how to manage around the woodpecker. We told the foresters, hey, this is what the woodpeckers need, and we've been doing it a little wrong. Can y'all switch? And they gave them a set of parameters like, hey, can you just not harvest within 90 feet of any cluster? Yeah, sure, there's no problem. You know, you tell me where the center of the cluster is, I'll slap a buffer on it and I'm good. Put some flagging around there, I'm good.
How do you know it's a 100-year-old tree unless you cut it down?
I've got this cool little tool called an increment borer, and it bores a little hole and it pours in there, and then I pull it out, and if I aim that thing just right, I get to the dead center of the tree and I pull it out and go, oh, hey, look, red heart fungus starts right here. And the trees, a lot of times if there's rot, I can't count past the rot point because there's no more rains, but I pull it out and I mount it on a little piece of board and I sand the heck out of it. And if it's a cypress tree, I lose my mind because the thing's called false rings, and I put it under a microscope and I count the lengths of the rings. That's called dendrochronology. And I can tell you when the floods were, I can tell you when the fires were, I can tell you almost every, trees are time capsules. And with a tiny little tool that doesn't hurt the tree, I can bore in and pull out a time capsule. And one of my major professors in undergraduate, that's what he did. He was on the Cypress Advisory Committee. Louisiana was like, we got a problem. Cypress forests aren't regenerated, and people are logging cypress forests. Not a problem to log a cypress forest so long as the cypress forest regenerates. Remember that one. What happened before, we didn't have any foresters in this country before about 1900. Anybody heard of Gifford Pinchot? Yep. I've seen the tree that in Muir Woods. So yeah. Actually, he and Muir were really good friends until the Forest Service did a few things, and Muir went one way philosophically, and Pinchot kind of went a different way philosophically, and put it into really cool, easy to understand. The National Park Service is John Muir's legacy. Find these amazing landscapes, wall them off, and don't do anything with them. That's completely valid. We can't do that though with everything. Pinchot's concern was, if we don't do something, we're not going to have any wood in this country. We're going to destroy all of our forests, because what we're doing right now is not forest management, which they've done for centuries. It's logging. It's exploitive logging. They literally, like, this country's so big, we won't ever run out of woods. And then they got about to the Sierras. Yeah, I got you. And then they got about to the Sierras, and they were like, wait a minute, we got this thing called the Pacific, and if we cut all the way over there, we're not going to have any more wood. So John Muir, Gifford Pinchot's philosophy was the greatest number of good to the greatest number of people in the long run, i.e. we need to manage for forest regeneration. And I'm sure if we could talk to Gifford Pinchot, he would say, well, if you're managing in a way that decreases or changes the amount of forest or eliminates a particular forest type, then you're not practicing forestry properly. But that's an element of forest ethics. Remember, I'm a forester. I don't tell you how to manage your land. I'm not a regulator or anything. I come and what I tell people is, you tell me your drains for your landscape and I make it. I got the tools in the toolbox. You tell me what you want. If you want the most beautiful longleaf pine woodland ever, I can make it happen. It just may take 150 years. You know.
Anybody else have questions?
So our properties mainly South Pine Lake, not clear about pasture and stuff like that. You'll want Holly, the place taking over everything, you never learn this enough and you using this environment.
One, that is going to change over time. If you try to burn it like a slash pine forest would normally, you would probably kill all your trees. So it's like peeling an onion. So the first thing I would have to do is take a look at your vegetation composition, fuel load, and say the first burn I would do this time of year under these prescriptions. And then I would slowly walk it until I got to my optimal burn pattern, which is for a slash pine forest is between every year to every 5.
Is that exactly like the deer coming through the, then? Okay, I'm just asking.
No, deer, the deer that are probably in that forest right now are using it for a bedding. Because it's a good place to go and hide and sleep. You know, it's dense, it's thick, but there's not a lot of food for them. You know, versus an open grassy woodland, there's a lot of food for them, especially in the summer. So if you convert all of it to, you know, if you burn it all as one big block, eventually you'll get a different set of food and they'll utilize it more as food. And if your neighbor still has that condition like you're talking about now, they may go over there in bed and then come and eat up here. Not so much of will it make them go away, but right now you probably have no quail. Because quail don't like those conditions. If you started burning a lot, there might be quail with pain. Wild turkeys are gonna like it. So it's not so much a question of am I managing right? If your primary species is deer and you say I want optimal deer habitat, guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna give you management recommendations for deer, and I'm not gonna focus too much on turkeys, wild, and other wild. Now, usually as a forester and most people that have interacted with them, I try to have a conversation with the landowner. Because a lot of landowners like you say, well, I know I'm supposed to burn, how do I start? And it's like, let's drill down to what are your goals? If your goals are good habitat across the board, then I'm gonna give you a series of recommendations. But, and I can come out and take a look, you can contact the county forester here, Ashley White, she's great, she can probably get to you faster than I can, because I cover more counties. And I have a lot of things, I do a lot of these kind of presentations and stuff, but I can't come out to the forest and take a look and I can check. Because it may be a thing of, okay, well, your Yukon is so well established that you're gonna have a hard time controlling it with fire. So we need to hit that chemical first. And then move it towards a point that we can introduce fire and then use fire explosives.
You should also look up, what fire does a pollinator.
Yeah.
It's actually very good.
Fire is the best management tool we have for our farm in the eastern United, well, really nationwide.
Anybody else have questions?
When you talk to people and they tell you what their goals are, what they want, do you ever feel somewhat compelled to help steer those goals in a better direction? Like environmentally active.
My job is not to tell a landowner what their goals and hopes and dreams are. I will tell you if your goal is unrealistic. I will tell you if I think your goal is going to cause you or your heirs problems because it's going to increase erosion and stuff like that. What you choose to do with the information and how you choose to respond to that information is up to you. And believe me, as a forester, I've had a whole lot of people look at me and tell me, well, I don't care what you say, it's my land, I'm gonna manage it. I go, okay. If it's so far out there what they want to do that I feel like either A, I can't make them happy as a client no matter what I do, or B, they're gonna ask me to do something ethically wrong and I'm gonna lose a license. I don't need your money, find a new forester. You know, in professional circles, my dad was an attorney and he used to use a phrase called fire your client. Foresters will do that. And I have had landowners that would talk to me as a public service forester and said, I've called every forester on the list and then one of them, none of them will work with it. Foresters talk. And I try to gently explain to them that you as a client are probably asking and doing things, or I had one of them that flat up shortchanged his forester and refused to give him his fee. You know, and I said, foresters talk. And he was like, well, I don't see what that matter. I didn't think he did a good job. I don't think I owe him money. I said, you signed a contract. He said, yeah, he sued me too. I hate that, you know. And I was like, I would expect so, you know. I mean, if you go down to Walmart, you take goods off the shelf and you don't pay for them, they're gonna charge you. And I'm gonna let you walk out the store, a professional, he gets paid off of his services, or she gets paid off of her services. So, you know, I mean, you basically stole from the man, you know. Well, and every forester in all of southeast Louisiana and southwest Mississippi knew that exact client, what had happened, and he was basically blacklisted. So, you know, it matters. What you got?
I live in. So very heavily managed by the company. And when we moved onto the land, we always do it right here. For that, I can make it clear to our thoughts. We planted it out. The question is, if fire is so important for science, why didn't they do it for us?
Because they didn't have to under their management regime, and if my goal is purely per acre per year, unless the competing vegetation is causing me a problem with growth and yield, I'm not gonna do anything about it, because it's an ag crop, and that's basically kind of a weed competition control. And then the other answer to that is, I got this other management tool called herbicide. And so they made the decision that herbicide was a much more cost-effective way and less risk to their timber production, because if I contracted somebody to do it, most industrial forest landowners do not do their own burning because of the risk. And you know, if I do something and I put smoke on you and you've got a deep enough pocket and want to sue me, are you going to sue just a private forester that's got a small pot of money from his, or are you going to sue Ray and him? What you think of Ray? I mean, Ray and Near's going to sell out. Well, there's people that know that, and they do that, so that's why Weyerhaeuser and those guys don't. And the answer is, for their land management goal, they have a better tool.
Gotcha.
So fire is a competition control treatment. It's also a wildlife benefit treatment. Their most cost-effective competition control answer was the herbicide. And so that's why. And that's a really good question. I'll put a pin in, and I'll come back and talk about something that we're seeing locally with all of the development, and I call it. So a lot of the land that's being sold for development around here in 10 and 20 acre blocks is former timberland. Well, when you buy a 10 or 20 acre block of timberland, you can't really manage it that way, because you call the logging company and go, hey, I got 5 acres of pine plantation that really needs thinning, and I'm starting to have disease issues. Can you come thin it? And they say, no, we're sorry. There's not enough wood there for us. Because now there's no little small pulpwood truck and guys with chainsaws. You know, take this one in for what it's, especially in Florida, because insurance is a fun world. Workman's comp is a really fun world. It is more expensive to put a chainsaw in your hand and put you on the ground than it is for me to buy a $500,000 machine to do it to put a man. And that machine can cut a lot more trees than you.
Yeah.
So it's an economic, when you really drill down, economics, guys, that's just the bottom line. What house you live in, what you buy at the grocery store. They did a price elasticity analysis on certified sustainable wood products. Anybody want to take a guess on the percentage markup the average consumer said they paid to know that wood was certified sustainable? It came from a sustainably managed forest. I'll just take zero. That luckily people have a little more faith in society, have a little more faith in people's goodwill. It's north of 5%. Do I have any bids? Nope. Below 20. Approximately 10 to 12%. So for every dollar they spent on paper, they were willing to spend a dime more. They're willing to spend $1.10 to know it was certified sustainable. So that's one of the things. So, but that's an issue. What do y'all think we lose the most? What do you think the US Forest Service and all of the fun forestry professionals and stuff like that has identified as the number one threat to US forests?
Building, people.
Land use conversion. Primarily to urban development. Not all of the giant wildfires, not hurricanes, not timber companies cutting down trees, none of that. People building houses. And we live in the poster child for it. You know, I can't tell you how many times I drive up and down this county. I would tell my wife, I remember writing the stewardship plan for that before they cut it down and turned it. I can take you to probably half of my forest blocks that I used to work on at county forester, a lot of them were converted. But one of the issues when you have that fragmentation and what we're calling urban interface expansion is you had areas that used to be well-managed pine plantations that now, because of fragmentation and being broken up into small, unless you have 20 landowners that can agree on something, you can't do the management anymore. And that's probably one of my number one calls. Something like what you just said is, okay, the answer is, if you talk to the timber company that's next door, they might have sent the logging crew in to thin your pines while they clear cut their remaining. That's very common. But most people don't know to watch out and talk to that. They don't even, a lot of times it's hard to even get anybody at Wirehouse or somebody to pick up and answer the phone if you're just giving the phone.
I'm inside 6,000 acres.
Yeah.
They tell me.
Well, what I'll encourage you to do is be a good forest neighbor, realize what they're doing and why they're doing it. And, you know, tell your neighbors, you know, hey, I know the clear cut, maybe we don't like seeing the clear cut around our house anymore, but they've replanted it. Look, give it 10 years, you won't even know it was clear. Because what happens is a lot of people move into that area and they very actively protest forest management or agriculture. You know, whether it's a dairy farm next door, they move in, they buy a house next to the dairy farm and they go, I don't like the smell. The dairy farm's been there 140 years. You know, didn't you think about that there was going to be a smell? So that's encourage you to. I used to get those calls.
Anybody else have any questions? All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up and thank you, Ian.
Excellent.